if you're smart enough to pull off something like this, like why don't you just do something legitimate?
Found out this person when he tried to claim for an additional 93 hours of work.
We don't want to screw your business, so let's combine best of both. Not in a single company, but we'll stick to our own strengths.
And welcome to Slatapod 59, the Noise Edition. Hi, Esther.
Hello.
What's going on over there?
I'm accompanied by some drilling sounds from the not quite the next door neighbours, but neighbours upstairs, I think.
Well,
redoing their kitchen.
Redoing the kitchen. Okay. So look, we decided to go ahead with this anyway, and give you a quick update on everything that's happening in the language industry. It's so important that we can't skip it, not 1 week. And drilling or not, we'll plow ahead. We're going to have a great guest later on, Maarten Verwest, the founder and CEO of Limecraft, limecraft.com. Media digital workflow company that integrates script writing, production, post-production, publishing of all kinds of audiovisual content, cloud-based platform. We'll talk about, MediaLog, future of MediaLog production, workflows, especially subtitling. It's really going to be super interesting to listen to Maarten, what he says. I had a conversation with him yesterday, and it was, I learned a lot. So we're definitely going to replicate that today. And so let's see if you can join us. Let's see how the noise holds up. If it's too much noise, maybe I'll do it myself. Otherwise, let's see if you can join. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about, just briefly revisit XTM's sale to the private equity firm. They're over in I think it's LA. Then briefly talk about the Big Words Big renewal with that giant interpreted contract in the UK. And then this super interesting ruling in Poland around machine translation, use of like Google Translate, what basically constitutes a professional translator. Another big, and then a couple of big European Union wins. Semantics won a big contract with I think that's the European Commission, right? And then the European Parliament's move. We did a feature story on how the European Parliament moved to RSI. So let's talk about that. Kicking off with XTM. So can you just give us, just remind us again, some of the facts around that transaction, size of XTM, who K1 is, and then maybe just let's have a brief discussion around the industry implications, etc.
Sure. Yeah. So the facts are XTM sold the majority stake in the business to K1 Investment Management, like you said. So XTM, UK-based translation management system, founded in 2002 by Bob Villens, who's the current CEO, and Andre Zaidon, who is the current CTO. The deal closed in January 2021. In terms of size, so we've got revenue run rate for XTM, which is around 8 million GBP or $11.5 million, and annual recurring revenues, also a different metric, of £7 million or around $10 million. So they
can I just pause you there for a second?
Sure.
We need to clarify with them what the non-recurring part of their revenue is at some point. That will be interesting. So it seems like there's like 2 million non-recurring. I mean, this being a pure play software company, I wonder what the non-recurring portion would be. I'll check with them.
Deployment, setup stuff.
Do you think that's that much? Could be, huh?
I don't know.
Anyway, so how many people work at XTM?
Yeah, they employ just over 180 people. They said they have 400 paying customers and 8,500 paying users.
Got it. And so they ran a very competitive M&A process. I think we briefly touched on it last time. So, what does that mean, a competitive M&A process? Well, you have a lot of bidders. So I'm sure they got a decent valuation. They didn't disclose valuation, but they ran a competitive process. UK, European, and US growth investors. Turns out the winner was K1. Again, this is a LA-based, growth equity, private equity firm. So it's not as early as venture capital, so it's not like it's early and risky, but it's not like a typical private equity that tends to invest in a language service provider, right? So this is somewhere in between. So it's more on the tech side, but it's also not a startup, because XTM is not a startup. I mean, they've been around for nearly 20 years. It's a very solid software business with long and stable client relationships, right? So they just need some additional capital to take the business to the next level. So it's interesting. I think K1 has invested in like 140 companies already. So I'm sure they're pretty experienced and can bring a lot of...
they're quite focused on enterprise software and SaaS companies in particular, I think.
Yeah. Sounds similar to Across. I mean, Across is, well, it's not, this
Volaris.
is... Yeah, Volaris, right? I'm still not 100% clear around the structure. So Volaris acquired Across outright and now runs it as like a separate, well, just one of their portfolio companies, as it were, right? And they have no intention of selling. I guess K1 has an intention to sell eventually. XTM also updated us on some of the features they're expected to launch. So, what you'd expect, more file formats, custom filter, interestingly, video subtitling. So they're also going into the multimedia audiovisual space, and then more around NMT and just, generally improved UX for translators. So, this for me almost completes like the, what's the term, like battle of the TMS funding and M&A cycle. I mean, we've got MemSource, SmartCat, Across, XTM. You could kind of arguably say that Trados and SDL fall into this bracket too, right? I mean, they were also acquired. Just, I guess there's not going to be a lot of additional funding going into it. I mean, it's a different acquisition, of course, with SDL and Trados, but let's see how that plays out.
As well, wasn't there?
You're right, localized. Well, I probably skipped a couple already. I mean, there's a lot going on in that space. You're right, localized, and I'm sure I missed some. Poland. That was so interesting. It was not the freshest of stories, but it was. We came across it on a LinkedIn post. I think that was a ruling. So let me just kind of, in a nutshell, tell you what went on there. So in a nutshell, it was a court case in Poland in 2013, and now, well, the ruling came down, right? Because some of these rulings take a long time to go through the court. So last year there was a ruling around a case that happened in 2013 where an LSP was looking for collecting a payment on a book translation from Polish into English, but the client refused to pay because the client said it was so poorly done that they had to hire another LSP to do the job correctly. Turns out apparently 92% of the translation was done using Google Translate and doing some post-editing. And then also they didn't use a quote unquote professional translator. They just used somebody who, had like I guess was bilingual and just used, stuck it into Google Translate. And that's Google Translate 2013. So that was not neural yet. In a nutshell, what happened was the court then had to rule whether, they should pay. And I think they ruled against it. So no payment, because they said the services were not as advertised, and the services were advertised as by a professional translator and edited by native speakers. So that didn't happen, right? So they used somebody using Google Translate, and then also they ruled on that person that the LSP hired cannot be considered quote unquote a professional translator, because that a professional translator would need A, unit training and translation, be knowledgeable in rules of translation, and have practical experience in and substantive knowledge of the field. So I think it's very interesting that a court has ruled on this particular case, which, from the outside seems, of course, very kind of a niche case, but in this industry is core to what's happening, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I guess I wouldn't say it's common practice, but of course this happens relatively often. You have some people trying to submit pure emptied or just empty content that was just roughly edited, etc. Now, what's your take on this?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. One is it's difficult to kind of equate it to the present day because, like you said, 2013 version of Google Translate is a world away from what it is now, and also what most LSPs, if they are using MT, would be using. So I think there's that. But then the second point for me is that it really highlights the importance still of a professional translator or a professional post editor, one or the other, or both. And I think that still holds true.
I agree. So I think on the MT side, obviously we've come a long way. It's basically post editing. MT has become kind of the de facto way people do translation almost in many areas. I mean, I remember that David from MemSource told us that more than 50% of their volumes were MT. Post editing MT. But that's just one side of the equation. I mean, the other side is, do you have a professional who has like an understanding of the field and has an understanding of the process of translation. So interesting ruling, got a lot of traffic on the website. It's always interesting to see which stories perform in terms of traffic. So this one has been going super strong for like 3 days. So we've got like 50 retweets, which is also somewhat unusual. So, it seems like this continues to hit a raw nerve with the translator community out there. So yeah, interesting. Go over there, check it out. And thanks to Chris and also Kimon for giving us some color on this. And yeah, also speaking about MT, I think Semantics teamed up with ES Team and Simulingua, and they won a giant European Union contract somewhat based on like an MT based offering. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of a consortium, I guess, of bidders almost. I think that's what you call it. But I suppose the headline is that Semantics partnered up with those two businesses, and they have won a $41 million or 34 million euro contract with the EU. This happened in December just gone, but I think it's starting probably towards the end of February. The contract is for translation services for the European Commission's Directorate General, which I think we said previously. And overall, the services rendered are going to help implement the Single Market Transparency Directive. So kind of an important initiative, I think, by the EU.
Isn't it part of that whole digital? I forgot. I need to look it up. Sorry, I'm blanking on that. There's this long like digital eco. I better not continue. And
some highly important project by the EU.
Yeah. Look where you're going with this.
I'm not in the EU anymore. I'm not expected to know about these things.
Look at us looking from the outside in on what the European Union is doing.
You have to have a sense of humor about it all, otherwise, where are you?
Yes. So ES Team, that was founded by Jochen Hummel, the original creator of Trados. So he knows a thing or two about language technology. And then we had Chris from Summa on the podcast, of course. So they're part of this consortium. Language combos there's so many. It's like 522 potential language combinations. So that's a lot of combos. And 2,000 linguists, right? They said Semantics are going to be working on that contract at one point in time. Who had that contract before?
It was Amplexor.
Oops.
Now part of Accolad as of 2020. So I think they're still active on the contract until the end of February. And this new contract, which Semantics is going to take over, will last up to 48 months. So what's that, 4 years? Including 3 automatic 12-month renewals.
That is a big piece of business to wave goodbye to. So
well, it's like $10 million a year, I guess, if it's 4 years and it's $40 million. Quick maths.
That's very large. We don't know any of the reasons why they chose him. Did they say anything about it? Like nothing particular? They did
talk about, we go into quite some detail in the article. There was various sort of like QA considerations, like sort of the ability to do quality assurance. I think obviously language coverage is one thing. But yeah, I can't really recall off the top of my head what the sort of standout reasons were.
Got it. And So let's move on from this one. So again, I think a big win for semantics, and on the flip side, not the best of things to happen to the newly merged Accolade and Plexer organization. But moving on to another brief feature we wrote. Well, the feature is not brief, but let's summarize it here briefly. So the European Parliament, we wanted to look at how the European Parliament, obviously one of the key buyers and not buyers, but users of interpreting, right, kind of pivoted to remote interpreting during the COVID days. Which are still ongoing. I mean, we're like in this weird lockdown now. We're like, it's called lockdown, but it's not really a lockdown. But then still, you've got so used to it, it's hard for me to know if I'm able to meet people. Anyway, I'm rambling. Moving on to the European Parliament. So we talked to Anna Grzybowska. She's the European Parliament's director for conference organization. And basically, they said, look, before the pandemic, we were looking at a remote option for conference participants. It was like an additional service. But then when COVID hit, obviously we had to completely, scramble and do this extremely, roll this out super rapidly. She said that the interpreters are still working on site in Brussels, but they're socially distanced and tools selected would need to interface with the on-site equipment, etc. So they evaluated 3 platforms and they selected Interactio. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Interactio, because of a variety of functions. Now, it was a huge deployment effort. So they had to actually pass legislation to unblock some funds from the European European Union and do the service migration, then dealing with all kinds of firewalls, because this is a lot of confidential conversations, I guess, would be going on as well, and some other kind of devil in the details stuff. But it seems that it's going well now, right?
Yeah, it seems like they obviously, like you said, have a number of hurdles and challenges when you're trying to roll this out at the kind of scale that the EU is dealing with for meetings. But I think they also implemented a kind of feedback system, which just asks the users to rate green or red for how they felt about how it ran, obviously green being positive. And yeah, they said that now they are enjoying weeks with a majority of green ratings. So it seems like it's swung into the kind of positive arena, positive sentiment towards what's going on. And they recently delivered a meeting with something like 700 participants joining remotely. So it seems to be holding up, at least.
Got it. That's interesting. Just green or red. That's great. That's all you need.
What more do you want to know?
What more do you want? It works.
There's no middle ground. Yeah. I mean, maybe they'll do elicit some kind of more detailed feedback, but I think for now it's just, it's yes, no, is this working? Obviously COVID is challenging enough without having to worry too much about eliciting the nuances of feedback.
Moving on to the next one, did the big word tell us anything about any RSI option in their giant renewal there with the Ministry of Justice, which was a big story, by the way, for those who are kind of newish to the language industry. That was like the 2012, 2013 story, where like the Ministry of Justice outsourced. 2016. Yeah, it just went on. I think the first one was like 2012, 13, 14, and I kind of when I started with Slator, I had to kind of catch up on that story. But it's just super long story short is they outsourced all of the court and police interpreting and Ministry of Justice interpreting, and it just didn't work. Like, it was a real operational failure, and then it went through several iterations of like providers, and eventually it ended up with the big word that's been doing it now for like 3+ years, and maybe even more.
4.
So,
It's 4 because this is the extension to that, what I think was a 4-year contract originally. In answer to your question, they didn't specifically mention RSI. I mean, this is a massive public sector contract, so it's kind of a slightly different arena to, well, I guess EU is also public sector, but it's kind of different. So there's a lot of remote interpreting happening, but I think it's typically video remote interpreting, so not the kind of simultaneous conference stuff that you would see in the EU. So they did say they'd seen a big shift. Obviously, they've been working on the contract for a number of years now, but they've seen a big shift towards remote during COVID, which you would expect. But they also said that in-person interpreting, so it's just an interpreting contract, in-person interpreting is carrying on. And they said, did they tell us? They gave us some metrics about the number of
18,000.
Yeah. 18,000 face-to-face interpreting assignments last month. So I guess January. So on-site is continuing. They've obviously got some kind of mitigations in place to protect the interpreters against, from COVID. PPE, obviously, and then they have custom headsets for for interpreters in the courtrooms, which allows the interpreters to communicate but remain socially distanced from the people they're interpreting for. But on the remote side, they said they did 24 million minutes of distance interpreting, they referred to it as, on average each month.
Wow.
It's a lot. It sounds like a lot, but I don't know. I can't really count in minutes, you know?
Yeah, it's a lot. 24
It's a lot.
million minutes.
Yeah, it's a lot.
24 million minutes.
Yeah. You don't have to pause.
That's
while I
like
do
the
maths.
that's like 600,000.
You can hear the brain, hear the cogs working. But I think for me, what's interesting here is, I mean, you mentioned some of the challenges that the customer, so the Ministry of Justice, had with this contract over the years. And one of the key metrics on this contract is the fulfillment rate. So they have a requirement for a 98% fulfillment rate on this contract, which is obviously, to me, sounds super high, and it's super challenging at this kind of scale. You know, you've got some 70,000 employees at the Ministry of Justice, and I guess a large number of them are potential requesters on the contract. But the Big Word's done pretty well on this as well. They said they're onboarding even more linguists onto their platform, which allows them to connect interpreters really quickly, and that their fulfillment rate has never fallen below 97.6% in those years.
Yeah, and to end on a sad note, which is completely unrelated to the Big Word, I gotta say, right?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, that was before that time. But there was, we caught a story in our sweep service this week around an older case, I think it's 2012, 2016, with a fake court interpreter. So that was part of that whole kind of, you know, the
debacle.
The debacle days, as it were. What would happen there? Because it was in the Independent. It was like all over mainstream media, and we got pinged by you know, some people that like wanted us to cover it. And I mean, it's just, to me, it's kind of outside of the range. So it's almost like 10 years ago, 10 years ago. But what happened? Well,
I think it's kind of like the Poland story, isn't it? It's like it happened ages ago, but then it kind of came through the court, and now you've got some resolution. So is reminding everybody of what's happened. But basically, this fake court interpreter earned £65,000. So it's like, you know, quite a lot of money from 140 cases. This interpreter had forged qualifications, and they actually went on to steal a legitimate interpreter's identity, so to actually be able to access a better rate, because this interpreter was like tier 1 rather than tier 3 or something. But I think they got found out, this person, when he tried to claim for an additional 93 hours of work on quite a high profile court case that was going on that involved like a gang type grooming thing, not very pleasant. But I think he kind of overstepped the boundaries quite clearly, and he was recently sentenced to 2 years in prison. He was suspended for 2 years, and he must also complete 300 hours of unpaid work.
Hopefully not interpreting work.
Unpaid interpreting. Why not? Well, all right. Anybody wants to know more? He obviously did the job, though. I mean,
that's what kind of blows my mind. He did the job for like 140, you know, cases. So it's not like he tried.
But he also at one stage involved. He involved a friend at one point as well. He'd like paid a friend to stand in for him like pretend to be him or him but not him in the court. And that guy also got I think 6 months in prison and various other penalties.
Just for, quote unquote, just for this, you go to prison? Like, it seems like.
Yeah, he was impersonating. Because he was like involved in, I think it's conspiracy to commit fraud. Yeah.
All right. Well,
serious matters.
It is serious, but it's with these types of things, I always wonder, like, if you're smart enough to pull off something like this, like, why don't you just do something legitimate? Like it's like this is quite an elaborate fraud.
How hard is it?
This is quite an elaborate fraud. Just get some real work. Just become do the
entrepreneur.
Do the certificates and then become like an actual interpreter. So it just seems very seems a lot of work for something that eventually is going to get found out anyway. All right, so moving to a completely different part of this industry, the media localization industry and the media workflow space, heavy files, and also I think in particular we're going to talk about subtitling, not so heavy files. And also what type of influence there, all the machine translation is having. I think Limecraft's very much on top of that part of the space. So looking forward to talking to Martin in just a couple of seconds. And welcome back to Slater Pod. Today with Martin Vervaast, founder and CEO of Limecraft. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Florian. Hi, Esther.
Hi there, welcome.
Hey Martin, where does this podcast find you? Are you in Ghent, Belgium?
Yes, that's correct. Ghent, most beautiful city in Belgium, I think.
Really? Okay, great. Yeah, I haven't been to, last time I was there, I was in Brussels, of course. So I think I was in Ghent maybe once, but ages ago. Well, so glad you could join us today. So are you at the office? I see a giant Limecraft logo in the background there.
Yes, somebody has to do the job, The majority of our team sits at home. That's software engineers and commercial people. They can work from home, but from time to time, somebody pops up in the office, especially better for doing webcasts and podcasts.
Absolutely.
We have a decent network connection.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm a little worried about mine. I'm on my cell phone here up in the mountains, but so far it's holding up well with all of the stuff we're running here. So, hey, so I probably did a pretty poor job explaining Limecraft in the initial introduction. So why don't you tell us what Limecraft is in a nutshell? Kind of give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Limecraft in general is on a mission to become the largest backbone for professional media production, professional video production in particular. And that includes, Florian, but it's not restricted to television and film, obviously, but applications also include e-learning, marketing and communications content for large enterprises. And for those customers, we manage video assets and we take care of their production process, and that includes, by the way, subtitling and localization, which is the direct cause of this conversation, isn't it?
Very, very interesting. So what's your background? How did you get started in this? And maybe tell us a bit more about the localization piece, but just generally your career, professional journey. How did you become an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneur. Probably since I was born, only I didn't know it. So it was a curvy road. I have a master in physics, just because I wanted to understand how the world works. And then after leaving university, I started working for a very traditional metallurgic company. But one of the key things we did was develop a database. So I learned IT on the job. It was quite boring over there. And then I decided, Florian, to for the rest of my career to go in information technology and to knock on the door of a company where information technology is like the blood and vessels. So I went to the public service broadcaster in Belgium. I said, you must do a lot of IT in here. And that was a brilliant move. Being responsible for technology in a broadcaster is like you're always allowed to drive the Rolls-Royce. It was a fantastic time. And in fact, VRT, together with NRK in Norway, SVT in Sweden, the BBC in London, we pioneered, and we were among the first 4 broadcasters having digitized the entire newsroom operations. Imagine from tape-based cameras to file-based production. We literally built the technology ourselves to make that possible. And it was at that time that we discovered there was a huge opportunity as well for entertainment production, so documentary and scripted. And in the research and development department, we started working on the prototypes of what became Limecraft Flow. And then 2010, we resigned from VRT. My co-founder and I, we hired the lead developers that were working for us before at VRT. So we jumpstart the company just to find out that the media sector is horribly conservative. And we were quite a bit ahead of the rest of the pack. So it took us a couple of years to get the prototypes, to get that product market fit right for the mainstream majority of media producers. And to your point, Florian, subtitling, because I explained we manage video files, a lot of them, but subtitling actually happened as an accident.
Okay.
As part of managing video, video is not self-descriptive. Typically, you need an archivist to describe in words what's in the images, and those pieces of text, you can index them and consequently retrieve your fragments. So quite early in 2012, we started working on automatic speech recognition for the purpose of indexing video, and the first use cases were for documentary makers and journalists for transcribing interview material. And then somewhere 2015, one of our customers approached us, said, hey guys, you've really built a beautiful transcription product. Why don't you consider cutting those transcripts in subtitles? Which we did, and which I think, looking back, probably saved our lives. Because remember 2015, 2016, the European Commission published legislation that made it now mandatory to put closed captions on videos, the European Accessibility Act. And whereas traditional subtitling companies were not yet into artificial intelligence, we didn't even think about it, but we were quite good at handling speech to text. And for us, it was a natural step. Initially, having it deployed at the BBC, now with like 10 broadcasters all over Europe, run their subtitling processes as one of the steps in the overall production process using Limecraft Flow. So it was an interesting journey, not really straightforward, but that's how it goes from the perspective of an entrepreneur.
And you've mentioned a bit about the origin story there and how it came to be. Are there any other milestones that you want to share with us, either around headcount or opening in different territories and things like that?
Yeah, why not? As I suggested earlier, we started in 2010 with a crazy idea of putting a software as a service offering in the market, in a notably conservative market, asking producers to outsource the core of their operations, 100,000 euro per shooting day in monetary value, to developing companies somewhere in Belgium. And obviously that was not, that was a hard sell, let's put it that way. And just about at the time where we decided to pull the plug or to make a pivot towards traditional software, a few really well-known names like France Télévisions, BBC, and Warner Brothers came to us and eventually asking, can you deliver us a cloud-based product? Yes, that's what we are. These companies typically operate multiple sites all over the place, and then it doesn't make sense to host point solutions for managing video in all these locations. So what we anticipated in 2010 and what was a bit early at that time, all of a sudden became reality. And no need to explain you, once the BBC signs up and backs your company as a reference, then it goes much faster. And our operating like 80 plus customers, the majority in Europe, and we're currently looking to expand in US and APAC as well.
Ah, nice. And just so we understand a bit more about the subtitling component and the language element, I know you mentioned ASR, but could you walk us through, how subtitles get produced from start to finish in your system?
In our system, it's a bit different compared to how subtitles are traditionally produced by language professionals. And that in turn means the technological alternative is sometimes hard to accept by language professionals pur sang. When we're relying on automatic speech recognition, it's really important to first have a QC pass before you start cutting such transcript into subtitles. I'll make that more specific. In broadcast grade, so high-end subtitling, it's not just best practice, it's mandatory to put the line breaks after the commas and the periods. So the accuracy for placing the punctuation marks is critical for the look and feel and the acceptance of your subtitles. If that's not properly done, you get typically computer-produced subtitles that we all know of YouTube. Nobody accepts it as these should not go on television. And this is like the expectation level of language professionals when they think of artificial intelligence. They think YouTube up, no go. What we do is, first of all, we've worked a lot on improving the accuracy of the speech transcription to put a number on it, a word error rate of 2% or less. There it becomes acceptable for professionals. And then the speaker segmentation has to be really good. The punctuation has to be really good. And once that's done, cutting it in subtitles is a 1 hour movie that's like 20 seconds, and it will be as accurate as done by a human. That's quite shocking. The difficult part is the transcript, removing the non-meaningful words, etc. The easy part for a machine is cutting it up in subtitles that are properly timed. And in fact, a machine is better in counting video frames and more consequent compared to the same job done by a human being. And then the other part of the equation is where subtitles need to be translated. In fact, it's two different use cases. There is same language subtitling for accessibility purposes, and there is interlingual subtitling for localization purposes, and they're quite different, but we offer both. Interestingly, in the beginning, usually language professionals absolutely hate the idea of having to rely on artificial intelligence. But frankly speaking, once they get used to it, they'll not be willing to give it back. Once they're comfortable and they have been able to flip it into their workflow, they will not step back anymore from that comfort zone. So it requires some change management.
What I'm trying to understand also, the subtitling and the captioning, is that kind of an important but just an add-on? It's not like the core, right? I mean, it's also around asset management, like managing these really heavy assets for your clients in the cloud, etc. So just who are you talking to when you're talking to a new client? Who's signing the checks? Who's really the kind of the guy, the person with the wallet there that you're really targeting? And how does the language component play into this? Is it an add-on? Is it something more interesting?
These are actually a couple of questions, Florian.
Yeah,
I'll try to get back to each of them. I agree. First and foremost, I agree with many language professionals out there that we should consider subtitles as part of the core of the product. There is video, there is audio, and there should be decent subtitles. And it's not just an add-on or a gimmick. Subtitles should be high standard. That's what differentiates great European content from some non-domestic products out there. The answer to your second question, who are we selling this to, is more subtle. Traditionally, local producers that were doing content for regional broadcasters didn't include subtitles. It was just the local language. Now there is legislation making it mandatory to put captions, but more importantly, given the rise of video-on-demand platforms that are rapidly replacing local broadcast, overnight producers are now creating content which is intended for worldwide distribution in the first place. So redistributing content via film festivals to non-domestic broadcasters is not just an add-on giving some extra margin to the producer. It's the design principle in the first place. Also, traditionally, subtitling and localization was outsourced to specialized language service providers, subtitling companies. We know them, SDI, BDI Studios, before these became Ayuno, etc. Those big and small LSPs, and they did the bulk of the subtitling at a cost of, say, in continental Europe, 8 to 10 euro per minute. Now, if you're a producer and you want to create several versions for worldwide distribution, this becomes a serious part of your budget. You want to be able to create additional versions at marginal cost. So it is Limecraft's working assumption that the more artificial intelligence becomes more and more intelligent, the easier it becomes for producers to access those technologies themselves straight without intermediary language service providers. That artificial intelligence will take care of the bulk of the work. 70-80% can be automated, and that they will do the finishing themselves. Now, this is exactly our pitch. We look for, when we approach a broadcaster, we're looking for the department where they make short-form content as a first stepping stone in the company. Because we know there is a very short turnaround cycle. The time between production and putting that content online is usually rather minutes than days, what would be the cycle time when you rely on an LSP. If the BBC puts a 5-minute piece of content on Limecraft Flow, it's transcribed and subtitled in 2 or 3 minutes. It's polished 2 or 3 minutes later, and they're good to go. So the starting point is often short-form video for do-it-yourself operators. But if I tell you that we've just signed up the Associated Press for processing 20,000 hours of content per year with the same convincing argument, which is a much shorter turnaround cycle between availability of video content and having it transcribed and subtitled ready for distribution. That's it. And that just-in-time principle I see it becoming, state of the art, accepted as a best practice. And then companies like the BBC, ITV, they're all insourcing again subtitling.
Oh, okay.
Hence, looking for solutions that can automate the bulk of the process and gearing up a subtitling team internally that can then take care of the polishing and the finishing.
Got it.
So that's really interesting as a kind of entry point for short form content. What's your experience of kind of scaling that or scaling the solution to longer form content generally, and then also thinking about how does one scale as a company? How does one scale within this industry of media localization and media provision?
What do you mean with scaling, Esther? Scaling for us as a technology vendor, or?
Yeah, exactly. So growing the business. Because you mentioned, for example, that it's typically quite a traditional industry, specifically kind of pre-COVID, I guess, to an even greater extent. But how are you going about growing and scaling within this niche, within this industry?
Well, we still have to see how it evolves. As I explained, what originally happened as an accident, developing this first prototype, we're no more than 4 years plus later, and we find ourselves in a very explosive market due to the fact that what was restricted to television and film, video in general becomes ubiquitous and best practice all over the place. Plus, the requirement to have subtitles under it as an essential component. It's hard to judge what's the total addressable market of such technology. I can tell you what we're not going to do. We don't plan, like some of our competitors, to put 20, 40, 60 million in venture capital in the company and create an incredibly accelerated growth. I think, frankly speaking, and in all transparency, the level of intelligence of what we call artificial intelligence, quote unquote, is just becoming good enough to be useful in some areas of the localization overall landscape. It's not yet good enough for high quality fiction production, where there is a lot of specific language, dialects, etc. It's going to be a waste of time. When we're dealing with e-learning content, so there is no soundtrack or documentary style content where Sir David Attenborough does the voiceover at a very low reading speed. There, it's almost 100% match, but we're at the tipping point. You see, for some use cases, it's useful, for some not. And as a technology vendor, we have to take care to manage expectations and to take it step by step, just not to burn our fingers. And we're going to evolve. The interesting point or position for us is that we're not just there for subtitling. This is part of, usually it is part of a much wider agreement whereby we take care of, brushes, managing some of the steps in the video editing process, and we'll see how it evolves. This is, by the way, how we usually grow the footprint in such a company. Sometimes it starts with the subtitling, and then we go into the production area where they need speech transcription in the first place. Sometimes the other way around. But what we do stress and emphasize with our customers is that they should only do the transcription once. Transcription has so many beautiful applications along the production process. It can be transcribing raw material at the very beginning. It's helping to create shot lists and rough cuts in the edit suite, and it can help doing the subtitles. So we try to convince the technology managers at bigger companies to create a certain awareness that they should do it at the source, not when the edit is locked and they're about to do the subtitling. No, let's start at the source and drag along those transcripts with the video edit process, reusing earlier results.
Very interesting. Well, I mean, this podcast is going to get transcribed, so there's all kinds of applications to that. But the VCs and the whatever, maybe growth equity or what have you, they're probably knocking at your door at the moment, right? I mean, you tick a lot of the right boxes: AI, cloud, media. So you're saying you're kind of taking a very deliberate approach to growth right now, and the partnering rather than taking on a bunch of outside funding and trying to grow super fast? Or what's your approach to like getting outside funding?
In 2015, when we were really in need for capital, I think we would have gladly accepted external capital. Obviously, we struggled our way to the point of break even and far beyond, now growing the company at like 10-12% per month.
Nice.
And there is no direct need, no urgency at all to grow the company faster. Let's not forget, it's a developing market, and you can really hurt yourselves by trying to run faster than the market can handle. So we'd rather take it step by step. We're watching the situation closely. When it comes to partnerships, I think that's a different angle to the same subject, Florian. As an entrepreneur, I'm convinced we should not try to compete with American companies using an American style. American tech companies have access to 10 times more capital than European companies. Now, there's two things we can do. Either we move our headquarters to New York or to West Coast and we become an American company, or we try to do it differently and in a more creative approach, more European style, if you want. We chose the latter. So rather than to screw the business of companies like True Subtitles, Linksoft, HeyMillion, and automating their process, we say, hey guys, here's our platform. It's white labeled. You can cherry pick and check what you can do with it to optimize your margin and to overall bring a better solution to the market, because we don't want to release AI unattended to a market, because it will always need manual review and QC. Consequently, we don't want to screw your business, so let's combine best of both. Not in a single company, but we'll stick to our own strengths. So that's more like an alliance-based, partnership-based model, allowing enormous flexibility, allowing much more scalability, agility, if you want. If a crisis like COVID pops up, such a loosely coupled network of affiliated companies can manage such an impact better, I think, than a VC-backed company. I'm not sure if I'm right. When we look back in a few years from here, we will be able to make the right conclusions. But I mean, that's how we've been growing the company to date, and it in a way it proves to be successful.
That's interesting. So basically, you're going direct to the production people at the big media firms, right? But on the other hand, you're also using the LSPs as kind of client/channel partners in a sense, right? I mean, because they're using your solution, white labeled, put the service expertise on top, and then service some of the big accounts. So you're kind of just to follow up. So there is never a kind of competitive situation where you're like going to potentially to the LSP's end client. Like there wouldn't be like a sensitive question, sensitive issue at some point?
Well, let's not be shy. There is this sensitivity. There is a potential conflict of interest. Now, like in many other areas or situations, you manage conflicts of interest through greater transparency. If you look at our website, yes, we can host some producers directly, but we prefer, and we are open about it, we prefer working through trusted service providers rather than directly. We take this from an opportunistic point of view for sure. Working with service providers, Florian, gives us much larger exposure in a shorter time frame than compared to what would happen if we would enter the competition head to head. As a consequence, we make agreements whereby we restrain or decide to not operate directly. Otherwise, we would screw the partnership. It's a balance. We've decided to seek as much as possible those partnerships and to go indirectly, because it creates a much wider scale. It has more potential in the end. It may be a bit slower, but we'll see how it scales on the long run.
Got it.
Oh, sorry, I put myself on mute because there's a lot of builder noise behind me, but I'm back now. So you mentioned there not wanting to sort of let AI loose unattended on the market, and which is obviously sensible. But I'm curious to hear what you think about some of the cutting edge research and development that's happening in various areas of of speech translation. So I'm thinking about things like voice to text, direct voice translation, things like that. What's your attitude?
It's frankly, I sometimes get a very creepy feeling. We've been labeling speech to text technology, which is 30-year-old technology, and I even believe it's developed somewhere in Flanders, here in Belgium. But when you look today, what happens with visual transcription, so not just audio transcription, but also a computer watching images and deducting the full semantic meaning of what's happening over there, not just face recognition, not just voice recognition, but recognizing a human being in their capacity of and what they're doing. That's amazing, with a speed and an accuracy that outperforms what any human could do. So expect that if that technology evolves a little bit further, I think we're going to see automated video editing processes, and what used to be controversial 2 years ago in the area of subtitling. The machine cannot do this part of the creative process. Now it's getting accepted. I think the same is going to happen in the area of video editing. As an engineer, it's absolutely interesting. But as to your point, I think we should not leave AI unattended. I think it needs to be handled with the greatest possible care, meaning in turn that the job of a video editor and the job of a subtitler will change. Coming from a point where the bulk, if not all of the work is done manually, this will become a higher level job. They will become, can I say, a machine operator. Some will like it. Some of the tech-savvy operators that, like to drive cars and motorcycles hard, they will love it. Some will not like it. And I think the very nature of their jobs will change.
Talking about jobs, I got a final question for you. So hiring around AI, machine learning, cloud tech is hard. I mean, there's a lot of competition from big tech companies. How do you get new staff excited to join Limecraft? I mean, now that you're in growth mode, double-digit growth every month.
And hiring in data science and artificial intelligence is even
it's hard. Yeah.
I mean, it's the demand is much larger than the offerings, so it's crazy the situation today. Fortunately for us, we have a huge competitive advantage, and that's that Limecraft is core. Its DNA is in the media sector, and the media sector is always it's more sexy than fintech or other industries. So if you look at our job openings on LinkedIn or in newspapers, we will try to use that as a convincing argument. Hey, we work for the best producers out there. Why don't you join this fantastic team and have a look at what we do? So that's our secret weapon.
Secret weapon in media. Great. Well, that was super interesting, Martin. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really learned a lot today.